Hey everybody, this is Kevin Lockett. Go to iTunes today, subscribe to the Digital Life of Kevin Lockett podcast, write a review, and be entered in a contest to win a copy of Emily De La Cruz's latest book, Make Yourself Marketable. So go to iTunes, subscribe to the Digital Life of Kevin Lockett podcast, write a review, and you could be a winner. All right, set, go.
You are now experiencing the Digital Life with Kevin Lockett.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Digital Life. On today's show, I talk all things Northeast Ohio technology with the Cleveland tech czar himself, Michael DeAloia. Now, during our conversation, Michael and I discussed how the closing of business accelerators, the Launch House and Bizdom, will affect the Cleveland startup scene, if Columbus really is a bigger tech hub than Cleveland, the underrated tech potential of Akron and Youngstown, and how cooking with an iron skillet might get me a wife. So without further ado, here's my conversation with the tech czar himself, Michael DeAloia.
Okay, we're talking to Michael DeAloia. How are you doing today?
Doing outstanding, Kevin. Thank you very much.
You know, the reason I'm talking to you today is about the Cleveland tech scene. But I want to, before we get into all that, tell me about emerging chefs. Like, when you co-founded it, is it
Sure.
because you love food? Or is it, I mean, because it's a great concept, but were you a chef at heart? Or how did that come about?
No, I'm glad you asked that question. Way back in the day, I had applied for culinary schools and also MBA schools at the same time. I was making this big life decision. And I'd gotten into the Culinary Institute of America, as well as Walt Disney had a Culinary Institute, which was down in Vero Beach, and was really prepping to probably take the Walt Disney opportunity. And I had gotten a letter from Case Western Reserve that cemented my me getting into the MBA program at Weatherhead. Right. And so I made what I call the proverbial layup. I went the safe route and decided to get my MBA as opposed to the hard life of being a chef. And it's a very tough life, despite the fact we see on TV the rock star, lifestyle that a few of the chefs get. So to make it just quick point, I was a frustrated chef over the years and certainly love food and being a amateur gourmand. And when the opportunity came to put together a culinary event business with Rick Turner and David Moss, I thought it was the right time to do it. Interesting thing is that business is for sale. We've all kind of gotten involved in other things in our lives, and it was a great 5 years together. We did so many outrageous culinary events and worked with a number of chefs who, I can honestly say we broke onto the Food Network. We actually talked with the Food Network a couple times about doing shows with them, and also we had a meeting with PBS about maybe doing a culinary show. Those things never materialized, but it was still a great 5-year run.
So what is that process like when you're talking to the Food Network or talking to PBS about a show? What's that like? Because usually the shows just pop up and people watch it or may not watch it. But what's that process like, talking to the executives, pitching, hey, we want you to be on our network?
Insanely frustrating, I have to say, because everyone's in the room doing a Mexican hat dance as to a concept or an idea. No one really came to us with a solid concept. They just knew at the time in both networks that there was this movement in the pop-up restaurant scene, and they wanted to somehow capture that on film. And they found us because we actually filmed every event that we did. We did these little, what we call, just like little reels, and to show what the event looked like and where it was and the characters and cast involved. And someone found these online and were using them as, there could be a show, a format, half hour or an hour, that could denote what a pop-up restaurant might look like. So the meetings were vague, and then finally we came back to Food Network with a concept called Pop-Up Go. And we did pitch it to their senior VP at the time, Bob Cushman. Bob is now the president of the network. He's also from Cleveland, Ohio, which is why you see a lot of Cleveland area chefs and restaurants on the network. And he was very nice and generous with his time, although it was very short. And the ultimate feeling on the Food Network side was that, in fact, there was no drama in doing a pop-up restaurant show. And we'd casually and comically remind him, well, really, there's no drama. We did a show, we did an event, and we forgot the forks for 300 people. And someone had to make a run to Walmart to buy 300 forks. One of the chefs, and this happens quite a bit, showed up 5 minutes before the show, completely coked out of his mind. And you get these instances where you're thrown a really major curveball, and yet somehow all the shows that we did, all these events, came off pretty eloquently at the end of the day. No one really saw the chaos that was happening behind the scenes. They were just enjoying really great food with phenomenal chefs and a really dynamic environment.
Wow, that's fascinating. So let's dive into Cleveland Tech for a second. So I'm going to read you a quote that you made back in 2006. And you said, "I'm committed to turn this city into a tech powerhouse." Now, that was back in 2006. The vision you had back then in the mid-2000s and the way you see Cleveland and technology now, is it where you thought it would be? Is it ahead? Is it a little bit behind? How do you see Cleveland from the time that you really got involved in making moves in Cleveland to kind of make this more of a tech center?
Yeah, the Cleveland tech scene is clearly light years ahead of where it was in 2006, and yet it still remains a very perplexing animal where it's had just tremendous success and sometimes just kind of questionable failure. And I'll sort of explain. There's clearly a lot more money being invested in Cleveland technology companies. Over the last 3 years, there's been documented over 500 startups that have received money, mostly through accelerators. A smaller percentage of those companies have gotten a Series A capital. And so you've got this big pot of startups that are slowly kind of making their way through the capital continuum and doing moderately well. And yet the startup ecosystem has lost 2 accelerators within 6 months, that being the Launch House decided in April not to do any more startup accelerators. And recently Bisdom announced that both the Detroit and the Cleveland accelerators are going to be closed, but yet the office would still be open for a period of time for those startups to sort of graduate. The Cleveland office will eventually close, and that was not a major component of the announcement, but that's what's turned out to be true. And yet, if you're over $25 million in revenue or $50 million in revenue in a technology environment in Northeast Ohio, it's a golden era because you've got a large number of private equity firms, not venture capital firms, private equity firms that have come in and acquired those companies. Perfect examples being Island Software, MRI Software, TMW Systems, and then Park Place Technologies, which all have huge private equity backing and growth tracks with really superlative management teams, deep pockets, and I think all of them could be billion-dollar-plus technology companies in Northeast Ohio, where in 2006, they were probably in that $25 to $100 million range. They've seen just really explosive growth in that sector.
So what's the difference between, because people hear about venture capital a lot, and sometimes they hear about private equity. So what's the main difference between a private equity firm investing in a startup versus a venture capital getting involved with a startup?
Yeah, they're vastly different types of organizations. So a venture capital group is typically going to be a bit more risky. They're going to take the riskier bets, and that's from pre-seed, seed, and Series A, maybe a Series B funding. And their ultimate goal is to either sell the company to another financial buyer, which could be a private equity firm, or to sell it to a strategic partner, which may be another technology company that cherishes that technology they've developed. Private equity firms are typically later stage. They're buyout, so they're taking out either the original founders or the management team, putting their own teams in place, and really using those platforms as roll-up strategies for a larger kickoff. So they're more mature. They're companies that have been around for a while. They're fundamentally sound in terms of cash flow. They're different dynamics. Venture capital, a lot more risk. Even though it's equity, it's a lot more risk, and therefore the returns have to be somewhat higher in terms of the percentage or the internal rate of return as opposed to a private equity group. I've noticed because the IPO markets are pretty, they're a little laggard at the moment because the stock market's been down this year, is that private equity firms, because they have so much money in the PE universe, they're just selling companies back and forth between them at pretty modest multiples, hoping that the IPO markets heat up again and they can start releasing these companies into that financial continuum of going public.
So if I'm a startup in Northeast Ohio and I was looking at Bisdom, I was looking at the launch house of maybe being a launching pad for me, what are my options now? Do I look at crowdsourcing to raise funds on my own? I mean, what direction can I go in when I'm looking at these ones? There's quite a few. I mean, you had Launch House, you had this Glide used to be helping people. But with these two shutting down, is that going to hurt startups now, or does it create a whole new opportunity to do something else?
I think the short term it's going to hurt because there's just going to be this period of time where people are unsure if they want to start up a company because there's far fewer resources available. You still have flash starts, which I'm a huge proponent of. You know, Charles Stack has taken on a big risk of going from a pretty controlled 4,000 or 5,000 square feet environment to now he's got 35,000 square feet in Tower City, all based upon startups. And he and I sit on the Ohio Venture Association board together, and I really think that if there's one person who can pull off the startup game in Cleveland, it would be him. And I think it would behoove him to put out the clarion call to those startups that were part of Bisdom and or Launch House to come join Flash Starts. You have Glide too, and Glide's a little bit of a different animal. It is an incubator, and they do have a fund, and the fund is split into an A round and a B round. The grant A is a $25,000 investment that's sort of seen as a grant in a lot of respects. And then there's the B grant, which is $100,000, which needs to be matched with another $100,000. So clearly an option for a little bit more mature startup company where you've got your beta, you're actually generating some revenue, you've got one or two key clients, and that you've had some sort of influx of capital from somebody else. Don't forget North Coast Angels, which I would put in that category of a innovation fund at Glide, where you're a little further along, you've got some traction. They just finished their third fund at North Coast Angels, which is pretty sizable. And again, you've got Jumpstart too, which has mentioned multiple times that they're doing a startup fund, and I would say like an emerging growth fund, which could be both debt and equity. So there's options.
Right.
The accelerator process, as you know, Kevin, essentially the accelerator would give you $25,000 to test an idea, and in exchange they got 6 to 8% of the company, so very modest portion of the company. They would open up their Rolodex of financial partners, and then the company would build an MVP platform, which minimally viable product, and start to get some beta clients because there's very little you can do for $25,000.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happened with the accelerators is what exactly happened with Jumpstart in its early years, in that they made poor selections, or they bet on the wrong horse, and the horses took either longer to finish the race, or there's just a lot of change. So, and for example, and nothing against Flash Starts because I'm a big fan, but one of their first initial incubated or accelerated companies was a nonprofit in the film festival business. Probably not a high growth bet to make. I think they felt like they needed to make a civic investment. Well, that's not what they're in business for. And so that was quickly shuttered, and I think they could have probably bought another, made an investment in another software company. So it's been interesting to watch all this kind of play out. I would have said through 2012 to 2014, you probably had a very stable startup and emerging growth environment in Cleveland. And now with all these new funds and all these new monies and the accelerators closing, there's just a lot of chaos right now. And I think people are trying to figure out what is the process anymore. I've talked to a number of entrepreneurs who are just confused as to where to go now and who to talk to. And that's not what you want in your startup environment. I would like to quickly mention another alternative, and I think this is another great incubator, potentially accelerator environment, which is the ThinkBox program at Case Western Reserve University, which is more of a medical device or consumer product-based incubator where they're designing products, part of the makers movement that's kind of sweeping the country. I would make a big bet on ThinkBox. I'm a huge fan, and it speaks to Cleveland's design, industrial engineering, product engineering, consumer product core, which is still fairly strong on the manufacturing side. So I'm very excited to see what happens there.
Yeah, I was at a tips competition in Hudson recently, and Case came up quite a bit doing some case with their presenting their ideas. So it looks like it's a really interesting thing they got going on there. Let me ask you about Columbus. So Columbus seems to be a booming tech center. And they actually got, I think they got flights going from Columbus to the Silicon Valley. So even though we're in Northeast Ohio and they're in Southern Ohio, what's different about Columbus that's different than up here? Is it because it's in the state capital and they're closer to politicians and maybe they're closer to where the money is? So what is the main difference that you've seen between Columbus and Northeast Ohio?
Reality and myth with that statement, and the reality being, I think Columbus is a little bit more has a little bit more risk appetite than Northeast Ohio and Cleveland, and there's a lot more transient citizens of the city. So there's not a lot of people who were born in Columbus. It seems like a lot of people are being brought into the city because of the bigger companies that they have there that are growing pretty fast as well. You can't discount Ohio State University and the Battelle Research Center, which are also bringing in just a ton of people for research and for academics and whatever else. So I just think they see it as a natural extension of their industries. They were not an old economy city like Cleveland. They were more logistics, services, and government. So I think it was just a natural progression along their industrial evolution to think, we could be a tech center. And they are, and they've proven to be that. The myth is Northeast Ohio and Cleveland has gotten far more money from the state than Columbus. It's not even close. And Cleveland's had more private equity and better liquidity events than Columbus. A harsh reality, however, is the entrepreneurs who have that liquidity event or who go public or who have been purchased out, they stay in Columbus and reinvest in companies, and you have not seen that in Northeast Ohio to a large scale. I don't know where the money's going, but it's been parked on the sideline. It's not being reinvested back into the tech industry. So there's some navigation and things that we have to figure out on why are the liquidity events not bringing or spurning more startups and more emerging growth companies in Northeast Ohio. It's like a one and done in a lot of respects. Whereas Columbus, you see that continuous entrepreneurial flashpoint where they're just one company after another, much like Silicon Valley,
Right.
But I would take Cleveland as a bigger tech center than Columbus, and some people may discount that, and I love to debate that point with them. They're both, though, pretty active in the technology sector.
It's interesting. So you write a column for the Plain Dealer.
I do.
You do. And you gave some love, a few months ago, you gave some love to my city of Akron. People usually don't associate tech with Akron, but you gave some love to Akron. There's a lot of gaming going on around here. How do you see Akron when it comes to technology in this market? And should there be more, I don't know, like regionalism between Akron and Cleveland, kind of combine resources and companies?
I think so. Not that I see Akron as a suburb of Cleveland, because it's not. It's its own little ecosystem.
Right.
And you could extend that ecosystem down to, Youngstown with the Youngstown Business Incubator, YBI, and some of the great things that they've done down there. And essentially they've taken over, one building to an entire block full of tech companies, and it's very exciting to see. Akron's a little bit more diffuse in terms of the tech industry, and yet they've had some interesting liquidity events. One in particular being Notice, which was acquired last year, and I think they kind of dispersed the people. I don't know if that company has a large operation in Akron anymore, but Brian Deegan started that company, and Brian Deegan needs to be heralded as one of Akron's best entrepreneurs, especially the 21st century, because he had another company prior called 66 Monkeys, which also got bought by a Silicon Valley company. Brian is a very smart and very capable guy, and I'm really thrilled at his success. You mentioned gaming. You got Blue Frog down in Akron, Ohio. I'm a huge fan of Blue Frog. I love what those guys are doing. Segment is another company that I've written about out of Akron, Ohio. Again, just a company that has raised, they got to be in their Series B, maybe C now. They raised significant capital. They've got a great software platform. So people should not be disheartened in Akron about technology, because you've got some really key players in software in Akron, and actually some really wonderful companies.
Yeah, I forgot about Brian, because I knew Brian a long time ago. Casually, I mean, we weren't like best friends,
Sure.
but I haven't seen him in a long time. So yeah, I haven't really heard anything about Notice in a long time. So yeah, I wonder what he's up to now. So people like that's always interesting, because they're really quiet for a while, and then they come up with something and it hits. Usually it just hits, or if it doesn't hit, the next one will hit. It's like he's a risk taker. He takes chances, and I think, like you said, he should be admired for that.
I think he should be on your short list to interview, and I know Deegan would do it. He is an interesting cat to get in touch with. He's challenged sometimes, but once you get him in a room, it really is a great experience. And I think you're right. I think he's in that quiet period of trying to figure out what his third act is going to be.
Right. So when it comes to startups, because out in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of talk about diversity. There's not enough tech diversity out there. I'm always a big champion of diversity. When it comes to this area, Jumpstart's, they're doing some things. If you're a woman, if you're African American or Latin, and you want to create a startup, but you don't have some of the same connections with some people. I think I read something where you mentioned like sales is basically interacting with people, but sometimes some folks don't have the same pipeline or connections that some other people do. Have you seen a uptick when it comes to minorities and women when it comes to startups, or do you think that's something that still needs to be worked on here?
Kevin, the unfortunate answer would be, I think it's laggard in getting the inclusion of both females and minorities involved in technology. I have seen, however, a significant increase in female entrepreneurs, both white and African American and Asian, moving through the pipelines of the various funds locally. You got Nichelle McCall, you've got Annie Zhao. I mean, you've had a number of young women who've really put together some pretty interesting technologies and have done a great job of positioning themselves. Right. Unfortunately, the African American side, there are very few ventures you can point to, and it's interesting because I was also at a pitch contest. I've done a couple of them, one in Willoughby and one at JCU, and I honestly thought at the JCU one I was really counting on and pining for a lot more diversity in the pitch, meaning those individuals coming in to kind of talk about their wares. However, there was one African-American gentleman who came in with a portable music recorder that you could attach to your phone, and it would muffle because if you're singing or recording into your phone, you're walking on the street, or you're in a classroom or in a building, you hear the white noise behind you, right? It's just inevitable. And this little device reduces significant amounts of that. So you can start singing some lyrics, you can play a little piano, hook into your guitar. And I thought that was going to win. And he didn't even win Place or Show. I have had lunch with him recently, and my day job is with a company called The Refinery, which is a software design firm here in town. And we've promised to help him get some of those connections that you're talking about. I think he's a really astute young man from East Cleveland who's completely broken the mold, and he's won a number of pitch competitions and business plan competitions, and I'm curious why the community as a whole is not embracing his technology, because it actually works. He's got a prototype, and he's been successful with, I have an idea. I just think he could be a really interesting case point of how to do it. When I was at the city of Cleveland as the tech czar for Mayor Campbell and Mayor Jackson, I have to tell you, I really worked diligently to figure out how, let me step back for a second. Right now, there's something in the range of 4,000 to 5,000 technology jobs unfilled because we can't find the talent. A lot of it's in software development. A lot of it's in what I would call the data center environments or data environments. And I always thought, why aren't we doing special programs for those individuals in either the Cleveland Municipal School District or for those who live between, let's say, Lake and Broadway, between East 36th and East 92nd in Cleveland? Because the unemployment rate there, it's got to be still in your double digits. Yeah, Cleveland's not a full employment city, and I would assume Akron's very similar. And yet we're dying for talent, and the talent is right in front of us, and there's very little being done to bridge that talent gap. And I think it's morally reprehensible. And the truth is, a lot of us are tired of sitting in rooms with other bald, fat white guys. Right. And there needs to be more individuals at the table. And in the technology industry, which, as you know, is still white male dominated, it's just, that's the fact of life. It needs to be changed. And, you know, I struggle sometimes with the answer and the solution. But I'd really like to see people come together and change that point, because the solutions are right in front of us.
Yeah, I agree. The solutions isn't really that difficult, but I don't know. It's something that affects everybody from coast to coast. That's the thing. It's like it's across the board. There's not one part of the country where you'll say, okay, well, maybe there's pockets someplace. I'm sure there's cities someplace where it's really improving, but across the board, it's the same discussion. So let's say someone's listening to this show, and they'll say, hey, I think I want to have an idea for a startup. What would your advice be for anybody who wants to create a startup?
Yeah, well, immediately I would get in touch with Flash Starts and talk with either Charles Stack or Shannon Lyons. I think those are two quality people. There's been some turnover with the entrepreneurs in residence at Jumpstart, but with that said, I think it's still a valuable place to go to and to talk to them about your concept or idea. They can really give you a lot of advice and counsel as where to go. And for those who might be a little younger in the college arena, you know, Blackstone had this idea of putting entrepreneurs in residence at each campus. So you got one's at Case Western Reserve, one's at John Carroll University, one is at BW, maybe out of Berea. But essentially, there's a number of colleges that have these EIRs through Blackstone that are supposed to help anyone who wants to come in the door and talk about their idea. And I would say go do that. And if you need help, you know, anyone's welcome to contact me. I do get back in touch with people. I try to guide them along the right path for startups. There are a lot of people to talk to in the startup arena. I might even suggest going on LinkedIn and typing in startups and using your geographic area, and you'll get to see all the entrepreneurs who are in your region, and go email them. That's what I do. I don't know everybody, but I do email people and get in touch with people, and 99% of the time they get back in touch, and we have great conversations, and it turns into good friendships and camaraderie.
Well, Michael DeAloia, thank you for the conversation. And people need to contact you or take a look at some of your various companies that you're involved with. Where can they go?
Well, they can always call, and they can call me at 216-212-4067, or at my email, which is mdealoia@mac.com. I'm always happy to connect with people. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. Always happy to chat because I just find these connections to be pretty rich and exciting.
One question about you personally. I read how you are from Dayton, but you really found yourself in Cleveland. What did Cleveland give you that you didn't have when you were in Dayton?
Access. I think, everyone in Cleveland, despite the fact that sometimes it can seem insular, everyone's willing to meet at least once. And I've really used that to my personal and professional advantage. Not like I'm trying to take advantage of anybody, of course. But these deep networks that I've been able to build have really propelled me in both categories. I just love the region and the networks, and everyone's just really been great to me of helping me try to be successful. I just found in certain networks, I've lived in other cities. I have lived in Columbus. I have lived in Dayton. I lived in a couple cities in Florida. And I just found that people were, it wasn't an esprit de corps. But here I think people earnestly want other professionals to succeed in a big, big way. And there is a lot of civic pride, especially now in both Akron and Cleveland, because there's these little, these cities have been on the upswing, and it's been exciting to see the improvement of downtown, new homes being built, all sorts of opportunities being presented. And listen, I got lucky. I got into grad school, and I used that as an excuse to call people. I'd read the Plain Dealer and Cleveland Magazine, and I'd just call people like, hey, I'm a broke grad student. I love to come down and just talk with you about your passions and your career. And I honestly, 99% of the people said yes. And it was a great experience, and I've never stopped networking. It was a great lesson to learn. And that's why I love Cleveland. And no one's ever told me no either, Kevin. I mean, I've done a lot of entrepreneurial stuff. I've started a number of companies, some of which are around, some of which not. I've worked for the city of Cleveland. I worked for a venture capital company. Recently, I bought a company with 3 other guys, and we bought this hosting company. It's just been a world of opportunity. I mean, once you get into a good network and people trust you and believe in you, anything's possible, absolutely anything.
And since you didn't become a chef, do you still go into the kitchen and kind of whip some things up? Do you still kind of sharpen your culinary skills, even though you're just moving and shaking when it comes to tech?
I do. I actually was filmed for a webisode, a culinary webisode of a chef out of Chicago. And she came into my kitchen with 3 mystery ingredients, and we whipped up an entire dinner out of those ingredients. Wow. And I was wearing my chef's jacket, and I had all my knives ready, my knife kit ready to go. So of course, I love to cook, and I still experiment with a lot of stuff in the kitchen. Probably not as much as I'd like to, but I do love getting in there and cooking. It really is a great relief.
What's a go-to recipe that I can make? Because I'm not a chef. What's a go-to meal I can do to impress some certain ladies on my culinary skills?
I always used to use, believe it or not, tacos. I would grill up chicken with maybe a habanero sauce or a peanut sauce. Like I'd use this crazy Asian chicken tacos, easy to make. Yeah. And I would fry the taco shells actually in the iron skillet. And super, super easy. And for a good bachelor, are you a bachelor or are you married?
I'm a bachelor.
There's a cookbook out there that is specific for iron skillet dinners for 2. And the recipes are super easy. They take 15 minutes. So I went out when I was a bachelor. I got my iron skillet, and I was making all these wonderful meals that the women I were dating, I'm now married, but the women I were dating at the time just thought you had to be a world-class chef to make.
Nice. What do you make for your wife?
Well, here's the problem, Kevin. She is a vegetarian, and I am a carnivore. So there's very little that we can share. I do make some pretty mean, what I call like big-ass salads. I just love putting everything into a big, bowl and serving it up. And I make a mean, what I call super nachos, which got a lot of peppers and the refried beans and layers of cheese and nachos. And she loves that, especially around the Super Bowl. We kind of share that. And I've been kind of experimenting with some soups. I'd like to, do some vegetarian and vegan soups and try them out for myself.
All right. I have to pick up that iron recipe book. What's it called?
Yeah. If you go to Amazon and just type in Iron Skillet Recipe Book, it'll pop up right away.
Okay.
It is amazing. There's like 75 recipes in there, and at most, they take a half hour.
All right. So if I get married within the next 2 years, I'm thanking you.
All I hope is to get invited. I'd love to be there, Kevin.
You will be my best man if that happens.
Fair enough. I dig it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Michael.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
I want to thank Michael DeAloia for being a great guest on The Digital Life. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at TechZarCLE. That's TechZarCLE. And be sure to read his tech columns on Cleveland.com. Also, be sure to go to iTunes, subscribe to The Digital Life of Kevin Lockett podcast, write a review, and you have a chance to win Emily De La Cruz's latest book on marketing. Our closing song today is Cleveland Against the World by Maurice featuring Luminary XI. The chorus is really infectious. I really dig it. And you can download the song on iTunes. All right, everybody. It's The Digital Life. I'm Kevin Lockett, and I'm out.
Cause here we go, been working all night on the city show. Yeah, even when the city cold, we flip the mode. But I bet they know my city code. That 2-1, that 2-1, that 2-1-6. We too on, we too on, we too on. Who you running with? Me, running with a pack of dogs. Run so fast, right past.